A bit of feedback.
This meeting is
All right. I think this should work. Is there any audio feedback at the moment? I just want to make sure that we're all good.
We're great.
Perfect. I'm going to share my screen. Just a thumbs up if you guys can see the screen right now, would be great. And then I see people are trickling in, which is great. Okay, perfect. So I'm on my computer, and for whatever reason, my camera is not working, which is all right. But first of all, welcome to my lecture about strategy in world schools debate, and thank you, Nilofer, for that lovely introduction. So my name is Arik, and I'm from Florida. I'm from the United States. I'm a debater of 7 years, and I've been doing world schools for quite some time as well, though I've had a mix of experience across several U.S. debate events also. So essentially, the way this lecture is going to break down is just a brief explanation about my background and experience. And then I'm going to segment this lecture into three things. First is about pre-round strategy. Second is on mid-round strategy. And finally is on post-round strategy. The bulk of this lecture will be focused primarily, though, on pre-round and mid-round strategy. So yeah, I'm not a rising senior. I am a senior. So I'm from grade 12 in the United States with several experiences across, world schools and British Parley. World schools is my favorite, though, because of a lot of different motion types, the spontaneity and impromptu nature of many rounds, and also the very precise strategy that is necessary to succeed and grow as a debater. So why is strategy really important? Well, simply, strategy are the actions and decisions that you take that really alter the trajectory of the round. So it takes a lot of time, experience, and goal setting to develop strategy, which is super worthwhile, considering its value in winning rounds and sharpening debate skills. I think that World Schools is definitely like the most impactful debate event that I've participated in throughout all of the different events that I have done. But this lecture is really just a culmination of what I know thus far. And there's always a lot of opportunities for everyone, no matter what point you are in your debate career, to learn more. And that is no exception for me. In terms of pre-round strategy, I think the first thing that is very important to understand really quickly, actually, before we get into the thrust of this lecture, if you ever have any questions, I'm going to be flipping back and forth between the actual slideshow itself, but also I'll be monitoring the chat every so often. So yeah, feel free to drop any questions in there, but there'll also be an opportunity to just ask your question live, at the very end of the lecture if time allows, but I anticipate we'll be able to get there. Okay, so back to the WSDC tripartite mark scheme. So essentially, what this means is it's a metric for which World Schools judges actually evaluate both sides of the debate. So typically, it's on a mix of content, style, and strategy. So very simply, that is 40% is what is said in the round. Another 40% is how it's said in the round. And 20% is about why it's said in the round. And really, content, style, and strategy, you need excellent, content, style, and strategy across the board to really succeed. And usually, missing one of these three components typically leads to a lot more variability in terms of how your round actually plays out results-wise. So very, very important to have strong content, style, and strategy. And we'll touch on how exactly we could achieve these things. But mostly the strategy will be the core of this lecture, but a lot of things will be discussed content and style-wise as well. And I actually have a lecture about style, rhetoric, and presentation, and I'll be more than happy to link that in the WhatsApp group or in the Zoom chat later on. So, World Schools is very unique because of its mix of impromptu and prepared rounds. So, obviously, for impromptu rounds, depending on the tournament that you attend and the rules that are in play, most teams have 30 minutes to an hour of preparation time from the motion release to brainstorm ideas, discuss strategies, framing an argument, and to build a team line in case to face off against opponents. So in impromptu rounds, while you're definitely more clear in terms of what side you're actually supposed to prepare for, you're a little bit more, crunched for time. Um, and prep time is really, really important to succeeding. And we're going to talk about some ideal prep time allocation later on in this presentation. But for prepared rounds, theoretically, you have an infinite amount of prep time. So prep motions are typically reliant on both sides attaining what is called like spec or like knowledge from diligent research and case construction prior to the round. And you should be prepared to debate any side and feel confident in both cases. Some tournaments have you debate both sides of a prepared motion. Other times you're only expected to debate one, but nonetheless, you are going to definitely want to prepare for both sides so you can strengthen your case for any given side. So there are a couple of things that you could do in regards to prepared round prep strategy. The first thing, of course, is to get a very early start in terms of prep. So you want to have frequent calls and meetings with your team to work on background research and the case to ensure equal and thorough understanding of the material. But it's also just really, really important so you're like the most productive possible and you don't fall victim to Parkinson's law. So create some mini deadlines to surmount time crunches and of course, everyone is usually very busy, but in order to maximize your ability to win rounds, especially for prep rounds, you want to make sure that you have your case done early on. Secondly, though, is very important to establish a lineup early on to ease into certain speaker roles and responsibilities. This also really helps in task delegation for prepared round prep. So, for example, now this is usually the case for most national teams, but the first speaker almost writes the case independently or with the help of several team members. The second speaker is expected to write the third substantive because the third substantive is run in the second speeches. And also the second speaker wants to have notes for refutation and rebuilding. The third speaker wants to brainstorm clashes and responses to opponents. And then other team members typically serve as devil's advocates. So just bringing up the other side's arguments. Some people are great with illustration. They do research and they provide examples that can be cited throughout the case. All of these things are very, very essential to building a strong case and making sure everyone is clear on what they're supposed to do. Thirdly, it's very important to research deeply into the topic and discuss this with your team prior to constructing arguments. Now, the best arguments are those that fully account for all of the facts and as much empirical evidence and knowledge as possible. And you're better able to structurally explain things with a full, clear picture of the status quo, which is, of course, vital for effective cases. And deep research also helps with illustrations. So in order to do this, you want to be able to read a lot of articles, watch videos, do anything you can to understand the topic thoroughly from all perspectives possible. Fourthly, you want to make sure to balance the creation of positive and negative material. So what do I mean by that? Positive material are typically arguments that show why you are winning in the debate, right? What are the reasons that you are winning in the debate? And then defensive material typically demonstrates why you aren't losing the debate, right? Once again, why you aren't losing the debate. And you, of course, need both because the negative material is primarily, refutation of what the other side is claiming about with your case. And the positive material is usually what comes out of your first speech and also your second speech in terms of the first, second, and third arguments. And having a good balance of these things is very important because skewing towards one without really having the other is very, very problematic strategically. Let's say that I have all of the round winning arguments and I'm running all of the reasons why we are winning the debate. If I'm not able to successfully take down my opponent's refutation, right, or their negative material, then I think in that sense your case kind of falls flat. Conversely, if you have a ton of negative material just explaining, why you aren't losing the debate without really showing the margin of victory, then you aren't really clearly winning in the debate. Now, to be clear, you can probably like get away with winning if you just skew towards one. Maybe like one out of every like 10 instances. But of course, having a balance is very important. Now, this round is particularly great because it serves to prove that there is, in fact, a lot of examples of national teams succeeding with a balance of negative and positive material. So in WCC 2022, there was an octafinal round of India versus Canada, and the motion was this House prefers a world in which success and failure are seen as a consequence of random factors rather than personal actions. Now, we won't exactly be watching this video during this lecture, but everyone will have a link to these slides, so feel free to watch the PM and the LO speeches, and you'll definitely be able to see why Canada had won this debate. Okay. So I'm just going to do a brief breakdown, though, of the PM and the LO's arguments and framing. So what did we hear from the PM? PM, by the way, was, I believe, India. Yes. So they said three things in framing. First, in propositions world, people view success and failure as a consequence of random factors that are mostly out of your control. Things like where you were born, where you live, your race, right? Which brings about certain, societal advantages or disadvantages, parental income, genetics, etc. The second thing that they mentioned in framing was their comparative, that for success and failure, the blame rests on the individual for not doing enough to secure success, despite the fact that most individuals don't achieve great success in the first place. And then, thirdly and finally, they tried to provide different quantifiable metrics for how exactly success is measured. There are academic metrics and financial metrics, but we're going to see how exactly Canada engages with this framing very soon. So this is the first argument from the prime minister. And the first argument was honestly a lot of negative material. The idea, like the tagline was opposition's world is toxic and is able to be hijacked by the elite. Most people can't achieve the societal standard for success. And even if people do try hard, there are so many random factors that factor into the achievement of success. Opposition's world is worse because there is a false narrative from the elite that they are inferior to the elite. Second, because the onus is on you, there you necessarily internalize guiltiness for your failures. And thirdly, as a result of that, rich people can justify their privilege. So once again, this world is worse. But I think that India definitely could have done a lot in terms of really explaining why their world comparatively is just a lot better. Why exactly perceiving success and failure to be something that is a consequence of randomness as opposed to something that is directly, affected by you. Why that is necessarily good in and of itself. Now let's flip over to the leader of the opposition speech. So this is Canada. Their first argument was mostly consisting of positive material, and they ran a principle of autonomy and agency. So the idea of having control over one's own life. Here they provided an example of a terminally ill patient, in that we believe that providing palliative care or hospice is important as a society, because even though you might have failed in that you were not able to live as long as you hoped, we still value these kinds of things. And we think that this typically cushions feelings of failure when you know that you're in control of it. And it's not reassuring to feel like you achieved something or you didn't achieve something because of random factors. And you're probably frustrated or despondent. Achieving success and knowing that you're the reason for it makes success all the more fulfilling and meaningful. And conversely, not achieving success and running into roadblocks and knowing that you had direct control of it means that there are opportunities to correct for that failure in the future and that there's always opportunities to improve. The second argument that Canada ran was about greater productivity and societal success. This was mostly also positive material and was really weighted on, the thrust of this argument was really contingent or hinged on explaining just the practical benefits of just feeling like you have control over your own life and certain things that result in success or failure. So you make decisions without knowing the likelihood of a positive or negative outcome, and when you know that you're in control of something, you definitely will put your full effort or a lot of effort into things like relationships or tasks. And putting an effort and caring about something in and of itself leads to greater meaning derived from the work that you put in. You're able to maximize opportunities when people don't give up. This leads to several impacts. This leads to innovation and social progress, happiness from small wins, and also accountability. Now, a lot of what we just saw from even just breaking down the prime minister and leader of opposition speech is the severe detrimental impact of not having enough of both sides. And while I didn't really flag it, in the notes here, if you actually watch the leader of the opposition speech, there's also a great infusion of negative material into the speech as well. And I would really highly suggest watching this round on your own time. You'll definitely be able to see why Canada won. So, yeah, balance your positive and your negative material. Additionally, you want to craft a winning strategy for your side and a realistic strategic approach for your opponents. Now, the best team strategy is one that is multidimensional. That is to say, it has multiple layers for different contingencies of the debate, right? Like the best case, of your case, and then, all the way working way down to the worst case. So, what happens if your arguments do not stand like you would prefer? And how exactly is your case still winning? As the round progresses. So you want to have a clear roadmap of the strategy going to the round, and that's always subject to change. But discussing the planned trajectory of your bench with the rest of your team is key to consistency. Additionally, you want to study your opponent's strengths and weaknesses if possible. So this looks like analyzing recorded rounds, notes from previous debates against that team, etc., to strategize accordingly. I know I do this a lot, especially with other national teams that I have hit multiple times. For example, like Canada and Sri Lanka. Very, very helpful to kind of just understand what exactly you can take advantage of, what to look out for, things of that nature. So now I kind of want to involve you, the audience. So all the people here on the Zoom, and additionally, if you're watching this video, uh, so essentially, this is an example of a round from Winter Holidays Open in 2022. So this is round 5. And the motion reads, this House as the U.S. would sign a mutual defense pact with Taiwan. Uh, so take 5 minutes, let's say, to brainstorm substantive material and form a general roadmap for strategy in this debate. And I want you to posit a few questions to help guide your thinking. And you can see that on the slide here. So let's put 5 minutes on the clock, and we'll meet in, let's just say 6 minutes. So it's half past the hour. So just as a warning, probably another 3 minutes, and then we will discuss. Okay, so it's now 4:30 Eastern, and I think now is a great time to begin discussing what you guys came up with. So, if any of you guys want to share anything, feel free to just raise your hand, and or just unmute and verbalize your thoughts. You can start with any one of these questions, but I'm interested in hearing what you all came up with. Or you can use a chat if you're not comfortable, whatever works for you. And I'll give you all a moment in case anyone's using the chat. Angel?
I was thinking about this, and I was thinking that since the stakeholders are the US and Taiwan, one of the substantives could be about deterring Chinese aggression. And yeah, that would lead to impacts like security.
Yeah, absolutely. Great start. That's definitely the core of the proposition's case, right? So like deterring China, absolutely. And then on the opposition, anyone have any ideas? Just generally? If not, it's all good. But yeah, Angel, great observation about the important stakeholders in this debate. And then, to really expand on this idea of deterrence, right, deterring China, I think we need to really understand the different incentive structures of those stakeholders. So the US, of course, has an active incentive to, continuous relations with Taiwan. but it's never really had a large scale, involvement in Taiwan other than perhaps stationing a few troops or, providing arms sales. Uh, but, on the other hand, that could be considered significant in the sense that the US already has some form of established relations with Taiwan. And signing a mutual defense pact really suggests that the US is willing to enter conflict if Taiwan ever is faced with a meaningful attack, uh, and the US would come to its aid. Perhaps that's a little bit different than what the US does in the status quo with arms, transfers, or stationing troops or, building bases, but it does show that there is a strong US interest to protect Taiwan from, Chinese aggression. But it's also, the incentive to make sure that Taiwan is a democratic stronghold in East Asia is very, very important, along with, other largely democratic countries like South Korea, in which US had a, strong involvement. And yeah, we're going to talk about the impacts of signing the Mutual Defense Pact in a bit, and also what each side has to prove to win and disprove to avoid losing. So that's our positive and our negative material. But yeah, here's my strategy for the debate. There are generally three things to consider, and this is kind of like the roadmap, um, or like the different contingencies that I would like typically write down as I'm a third speaker. Right. The first thing that we have to do is to prove the incentives of the United States. So when I actually debated this at the Winter Holidays Open tournament in 2022, um, I said that the U.S. incentives were twofold. First, to bolster economic and geopolitical ties with Taiwan, and then second, to protect democracies and the values that underpin it. And then also how, we explain how exactly the incentives of the United States are fulfilled by the pact, by the pact. And there is, decreased deterrence to attack with the pact. The second thing to really prove is to deal with opposition's likely claim about retaliation, backlash, and escalation. Now, a great way to do this is by saying that, this isn't the actual breaking point or tipping point for Chinese aggression, because we have already sent several hundreds of millions of dollars worth of arms and missiles to Taiwan. We have trained troops in the region. And the most that China has really done is just threaten and fly a few planes over Taiwan. This suggests that China does not yet have the capacity to carry out invasion, and a mutual defense pact is likely to increase deterrence and ensure that the United States will be there for Taiwan come the time that China actually does have the capacity to carry out invasion. Thirdly and finally, though, even if China does opt to retaliate and deterrence isn't enough, we are winning the comparative. If China is developing their arsenal rapidly as opposition claims, we prefer greater defense and support for Taiwan militarily and economically. And we prefer that much more than a world with less support and more reactionary measures. So this is the three-pronged strategy for the debate that I had developed that pretty much mirrored the way the debate actually went. And it worked out pretty great. So a lot of this just serves to prove that round vision is very important in making sure that you have different plans, as to how exactly your team will approach the debate. Even if the debate doesn't exactly go your way or you're having a rough time, it'll definitely make sure that you're doing your best and that you are maximizing your chance to win the debate. Okay, so now what I want to do is kind of just turn your attention to another round. So this is Doxbridge WSTC 2023, round 4. And the motion was this House supports Indonesia's current and proposed bans on mineral exports. You can read the info slide there. This was a prepared motion, as was the previous one. And I basically want to take you through the different steps or the different things that my team and I did in order to successfully win this debate. So this debate, though it seemed like it was just going to be a classical economics debate about the merits of protectionism versus free trade, transformed into higher level debate about which actor was best to actually fulfill Indonesia's economic determination and development. Was it Western countries, multinational corporations, and international institutions, or was it Indonesia themselves? Of course, each side, defends one or the other. So the proposition is probably defending Indonesia's self-determination and development of their own economy, versus opposition, which is probably talking more so about Western countries and multinational corporations and international institutions. So there are 4 strategy tips for prepared motions that we talked about previously in this lecture that we really made great use of, and I want to take you through them. So the first thing is to prep early. So we had pretty extensive research, and it kind of shows. The second is establishing lineups throughout the tournament. So I have a handy little spreadsheet that I created to really map out who is going to speak what round, and then also who you're going against. The third thing is to deeply research. So once again, I'm typically a third speaker, though I also do a lot of seconds and replies. But all of this was just my research about Indonesia and the mineral export ban. Uh, and yeah, it was just really helpful contextualizing the case and what exactly would run. And then also we'd have the anticipated opposition strategy, so what the other side would run, and then how exactly we would respond. So the first thing we would do is prove the utilitarian benefits to free trade and Indonesia's participation in the free market by exporting raw and unprocessed ores to countries' multinational corporations. And we said that it was pretty easy to take down with our principle. And the second is to demonstrate a tangible harm to Indonesia with export bans, right? So that is what opposition is likely to do. And then essentially what we wanted to do on proposition was weigh the economic benefits retained to citizens and governments and the country and more economic flexibility and mobility against whatever they've got coming. So free trade is good. The idea that free trade is good is easy to take down because export bans are inherently protectionist policies, and countries ought to have agency to make their own economic decisions absent any external Western pressures that suggest otherwise. Now, very briefly, in terms of impromptu round preparation strategy, there should theoretically be no fundamental difference between your prepared round and your impromptu round strategy, with the notable exception of having no research capability and you being under specific time constraints. So you want to have a well-established but flexible prep structure and well-defined roles as to who does what during prep. So a sample prep, allocation would be 5 minutes of silent preparation. So everyone just sits down, thinks, takes notes, and then 10 to 15 minutes following of preliminary discussion on framing and arguments and exclusively positive material. And then 10 to 15 minutes really determining the case split and also discussing negative material. Then 20 to 25 minutes writing arguments and clashes. And the final 5 to 10 minutes passing the clash onto the first speaker and finalizing discussion with the team. And in the back of your mind, you want to develop one or more paths to victory. And a great way to make sure that you're really succeeding in impromptu, prep is to make sure that everyone understands what they're supposed to do. So of course, everyone is supposed to contribute a case in some capacity, whether that's writing the first and second arguments or writing the third argument or writing out responses and clash as a third speaker or maybe even a second speaker also. But you also have just things like a moderator rule, right? Someone who's keeping track of time and saying, okay, guys, that's 5 minutes. Now let's discuss for the next 10. Right? You want, illustrators. This could be like many people, right? You want devil's advocates, people who are bringing up negative material. You want people that are working on clashes. All of these things are really, really important to make sure that you're the most prepared walking into the debate round. Now, I want to talk a little bit about mid-round strategy. So what do I mean by mid-round? These are consideration for certain components of the round itself as it occurs. So things like engagement via, points of information, things specific to speeches, etc. I want to talk about 4 or 5 things in particular. First, scrub-a-dub-dub. What do I mean by this? Of course, I'm talking about washing. So what exactly is washing? Washing, of course, refers to the process of actually um, symmetrizing a debate. And if, something is really, really close in a debate round, if 2 arguments or multiple arguments are being made within a certain clash that really, really are so close that, it is difficult for any side to win on them, washing the debate essentially helps you prioritize and prove to the judge why other aspects of the debate is more important. And those aspects of the debate are typically the ones that you want to emphasize, are the ones that you are winning on. And I want to best illustrate what washing looks like through an example from Ryan Lafferty's debate strategy presentation. Ryan Lafferty being a great debater, he is from Dartmouth. He was a World Universities Debating Championship semifinalist. in Vietnam. And yeah, so this comes straight out of his debate strategy presentation. And the motion is this House would ban homework. It's a very common motion that many novices and middle schoolers debate who do world schools. So government is likely to talk about how homework takes up time in a student's life when they could otherwise be doing better, more meaningful things. And then also another argument on Gov, or proposition rather, is that homework worsens academic outcomes by making students more tired, more stressed, and less able to concentrate in class. Opposition might counter by suggesting that homework improves performance in school by reinforcing the concepts taught. And essentially what you get is a really, really, big back and forth about these two things. And it seems like this is an unbreakable deadlock. In a way, these two arguments wash out. They neutralize each other somewhat, meaning that the margin of change in terms of academic outcomes from banning homework or keeping it is quite small. But what has a larger margin of change is proposition's argument about giving students more time. So proposition can probably break the deadlock by explaining what other things that students can be doing other than doing homework, right? Other than just explaining the inherent harms of homework, because opposition is likely to counter and be like, there are benefits of homework. Both arguments might be true, but the deadlock breaker is what exactly is done with the free time they have on proposition. So that is a great way of breaking a deadlock and really proving the utility of washing. The second thing to really consider in terms of strategic tools to employ is case shifting. So it's when a team's stance shifts from one speech to the next in a way that is strategic. Now, something very important to understand about case shifting is there is such thing as case shifting too late. For example, case shifting in opposition third is probably quite unstrategic because you don't give enough time for the proposition to really respond to it. Right? All of the constructive speakers pretty much have spoken, and it is not you did not give proposition a sufficient amount of time to really be able to address the case shift. And there's also a fine line between case shifting and looking wishy-washy, or right, like not having like a clear stance, or it can look like you're conceding to the other side's material. And we'll see a good way to case shift in the example for the next strategic tool we're about to talk about. And that next strategic tool is creating clever comparatives. Consider the Harvard 2024 motion, or Harvard World's 2024 motion. This House believes that South Korea should develop nuclear weapons. A proposition argument can be that South Korea should become more self sufficient and less dependent on the US and the West, right? And that the US and the West are bad actors for X, Y, and Z reasons. Opposition can respond by saying that the proposition doesn't sufficiently prove why South Korean reliance on the US and the West is bad in and of itself, and that the development of nuclear weapons from South Korea alone leads to escalation. But there is a clever comparative in a flip that can be found within the opposition case. Opposition can say that proposition winds up increasing South Korean reliance on the US and the West because South Korea needs guidance, resources, and support to begin developing a nuclear arsenal. For example, you need the United States to help you, make sure that your development is occurring in a secure manner, right? So this can look like troop allocations. You need help from the US and the West because you've never created a nuclear arsenal before, and your nuclear, energy program might be a lot weaker than the US and the West. All of this serves to prove that South Korea needs to rely upon the US, which runs counter to what exactly proposition is trying to argue for. Either South Korea accepts the US and the West's help, who will now have control of South Korea's arsenal, or South Korea is at a developmental deadlock and you cannot access any of proposition's benefits or arguments. But wait, proposition also has a sneaky K-shift opportunity here, which honestly might have been the better comparative to run in first. The idea that if the US and the West is not a bad actor like opposition suggests, in the status quo deterrence, I don't know why it says deference, whoops, misspelling, deterrence is sufficient, then it means that South Korea has even greater deterrence against North Korea because it can use the nuclear and conventional arsenal that the US and the West provides to South Korea and combine it with its own nuclear arsenal. The difference being that the nuclear arsenal is more proximate to North Korea and is a lot greater of a deterrent against North Korea. Now, of course, this still, leaves a lot of room for the other side to really argue about escalation and the likelihood for conflict. and beyond the scope of just North Korea, there are other stakeholders that can be talked about in the debate. For example, like China. But this resolves, or not necessarily resolves, but addresses three key clash considerations in the round. First, what is the current state of South Korean and US/Western relationship? Second, which side best maximizes regional stability? And thirdly, which side best preserves stable diplomatic and political affairs with other nations? Now, onto the fourth, kind of strategic tool to employ in the middle of the round is explicit weighing. Really, any speech following the first proposition speech should really be able to very clearly weigh in the round. So you want to consider several weighing metrics to explain the importance of arguments without using debate jargon. So I'm going to use jargon for the sake of just making concise the things that I'm about to explain to you. But magnitude is just the high degree of scale, right? So like how many people or how much of something is impacted, right? And then also scope, right? How many people are impacted? Thirdly, on probability, how likely is something to happen? Fourthly, prerequisite. So is there an argument or that is prior to accessing an impact? And then fifthly, there's reversibility. So how easily reversible is the impact of something? Like, for example, climate change. For example, compared to, say, marginal economic impacts that can probably be reversed long term. Also, time frame, right? So whether or not the short term matters more than the long term. For example, long term, can be very, very beneficial to be weighed upon, especially for developmental economics for countries in the global south. Whereas short-term weighing might be really, really beneficial for debates about war or the environment, where we really don't have a lot of time and we need to act now because we are experiencing the short-term detriments of things like climate change and global warming and natural catastrophes. So these are, of course, a non-exhaustive list of different weighing metrics, but weighing is very important because without really explaining the importance of your argument or explaining the importance of a clash, judges really don't know what arguments to prioritize in a round. And that makes rounds particularly messy and a lot more prone to any particular side losing the debate. And you leave the judge to do the weighing for themselves, which of course can turn in your favor or just as easily out of your favor. Finally, I want to talk about post-round strategy, but really quickly before that, a fifth thing that I just thought about was POIs. So you want to make sure that, of course, you are maximizing and making really strategic POIs. These can be, POIs that can be statements, right, to the panel if you think that something's being really, really clearly misunderstood. Or it can be really simple questions, sometimes even deceivingly simple questions for the other side to consider. And depending on how they respond, you can really weaponize that in your own case. So making strategic POIs while still remaining respectful and within 15 seconds and not badgering, they are great ways to really earn some strategy points and to also strengthen your case. So these are the five simple strategic tools that I would suggest to employ mid-round. There are many, many more. These are the five most important things that I thought were worth talking about in this lecture. Finally, on post-round strategy, there are five simple things that I encourage everyone to do. The first is to take notes during calls, even if you win the debate. More often than not, debates can be a lot closer than you thought. And understanding how you can increase your margin of victory and make sure that you are winning more clearly as opposed to very narrowly is very important. Secondly, is very important to ask questions, of course, if time allows, and also request for individual additional feedback. It can be very helpful because sometimes general calls sometimes cast a really large, wide net and doesn't really mention the specific things that you as an individual can improve on. And if everyone can, access that kind of specific feedback on a round-to-round basis, you will inevitably know what exactly you need to work on and what you need to do better. Thirdly, I would suggest speech redos and note reviews, and also watching lots and lots of rounds. They're really a great way to understand what is the essential strategy behind many teams. But also, it's just very useful to see what does good style look like? What does good content look like? How do teams construct, arguments? It was only after taking notes for a Canada WSDC round against Singapore in a debate about pharmaceutical development they could see really just how beautiful the Canada case was. It just seemed very very structurally sound by talking about your side and then how the comparative is worse, your side and how the comparative is worse, and you can really pick up on a lot of cool patterns that way. Fourthly, is to discuss with your teammates after round what went right and what could be worked on, and doing so in a respectful way. Um, Fifthly and finally, to create realistic, measurable goals to achieve at the next tournament. So, of course, you're going to be overwhelmed with a lot of different things that you personally feel like you can be working on. But of course, you want to focus ideally on one or two large things to improve upon. And you want to be able to leave a tournament knowing that you have meaningfully improved in those one or two things. And over time, those benefits will accrue, and you'll become more consistent, and you will be able to become a better debater overall. So that's pretty much my entire lecture. First of all, thank you very much for listening. And second of all, I'm open to any questions. If any of you have any, feel free to use the chat. Feel free to just raise your hand or unmute. I'm cool with anything. And then this slideshow will be linked in the description of the YouTube video to which the seminar will be posted, but I'll also be sure to send it in the WhatsApp group chat. So at this time, are there any questions? Going to monitor the chat as well. What is the right time for POIs? Great question. So, of course, you want to understand that, there are certain times where you can't ask for POIs, right? Like you can't ask within the first minute or past the 7th minute. But yeah, is there a pattern? Once again, great question. So there really is no one right time to ask for POIs, though you want to consider from the vantage point of someone who is actually delivering the speech. It is probably unstrategic for you as a speaker to take a POI in the middle of your argument, right? Or in the middle of your clash. Ideally, you take a POI, in a transition period before you move on to the next argument or the next clash. So in terms of asking for POIs, there really is no right time. But in terms of taking POIs, there's definitely like a right time or like an ideal time and a not ideal time. Because you don't want to kind of lose track of where you were in the speech. You don't want to lose your flow. And it is very important to make sure that you are taking POIs whenever it's most convenient for you. You don't want to feel hassled or pressured to take a POI at a certain point. And make sure that if you are the speaker, that you are in control, that you will take POIs whenever you suggest, right? Something that I like to do is be like, be very explicit, right? Be like, before we move on to the second clash, you seem to disagree, right? And that's just like an indication. You can ask your POI now if you want one. But in terms of asking for POIs, there's really no right time. Great question. Any other questions? I'm actually going to create a slide here, taking notes. Okay, so I've written the answer to your question in the slide. Hope that's helpful. Should we separate positive and negatives during prep? Great question. I would suggest, um, yes, I would suggest that. Um, you know, maybe not if you're opposition, right? If you're preparing like an opposition case, it can be very helpful to have negative, material kind of embedded in your case. If an argument, but only do that if an argument is sure to be expected. Like you are like guaranteed, almost entirely certain that argument will show up. So yes, um, I would separate it, especially for proposition material, but or like proposition case. But maybe for opposition, um, it's not a bad idea to have some negative material embedded in your positive. But just be very, very explicit and be like, proposition told you this, right? This is how you respond, right? Uh, so you definitely can. I would suggest it, especially for proposition, but maybe for opposition, it depends. Okay, I'm gonna write that also. Great question once again. Okay, Luisa, a good way to prepare for a debate might also be to think of rebuttals that can be used. I feel like I waste a lot of time on this and I'm less productive. I don't know. Okay, great point. So are you saying that you think that you are spending like quite a lot of time on just rebuttals as opposed to positive material? Okay. Let me ask you this. Are you a second or a third speaker? Third. Perfect. Okay. Knew it. I'm also a third speaker. So I think that especially for third speakers, your primary focus should be, of course, on refutation, but in a different way, that is quite distinct from the second speech, right? The second speech is a lot of, refutation, rebuilding, and then the third argument. Whereas the third speaker is really tasked with a lot of just crystallizing the round into usually two or three very simple questions or clashes. Um, there is a lot of utility in thinking of different, rebuttals that can be used, but at the same time, you need to be very, very familiar and comfortable with what your side is running, in terms of your side's own material. Because if you can refute the other side's material, right, like very, very well, and you have so much rebuttal, you're kind of diluting the amount of time you could spend talking about your own material and why exactly, what exactly your side had mentioned. So a suggestion in terms of third structure. Here, I'll put this here. Here's a suggested kind of structure for thirds. Intro. You know what? I'll even do this in just a second. Here. Intro, and then usually plus roadmap, and then clarifications at the top. If you think that there are like large strategic errors or things that need to be addressed. And then two simple clashes, right? Clash 1, clash 2. Within each clash, you want meta justification, why is the clash important, right? And then if you think that you're getting too carried away with refutation, I would even just start with your own material, right? Positive material, right? Our fundamental claim was X, right? How did, and then, maybe you could shift over to negative by being like, how did this engage with the other side's material on Y, right? And then you provide your refutation. And then at the end, you want to weigh an impact and then do the same thing for the second clash. So yeah, if you think that you're spending too time on rebuttals, I would suggest for your clash to start with your own positive material first, right? Hope that helped. Any other questions? Of course. Okay. I'm going to give it another minute in case anyone is typing in the chat. If you have any further questions. But if you think of something you want to ask later, don't hesitate to reach me via email right here. And yeah, you can also use the WhatsApp. I'm on the WhatsApp group as well. Be sure to join that for any of our viewers on the YouTube. It's a great community and it's just starting up, debating across the Americas. We've got several countries involved. And we're going to be a great platform for further seminars, some practice rounds, things of that nature. And if there are no further questions, thank you very much for joining me on this great lecture. And thank you for your participation from the audience. And yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Hi, in name of Arguments Across Americas, we would